Hello, if you're just joining, I'll just give a couple of seconds for people to join, but there's quite a lot to fit into half an hour, so just literally a few seconds, and then we'll start fairly promptly. But I'm really honoured to be here speaking to such a massive audience about a topic that's so close to my heart, and I hope that there's something that you can take away from this. So I'll probably just get started, and if people are joining, then that's fine. But I am going to be talking to you about creating anti-racist classrooms, so talking to you about some of the challenges that involves, some ways that we can implement it, why it's important. Yeah, so hopefully there's something useful that you can take back to a classroom. So as part of this, just go change to the next slide. Oh, yeah. So just a little bit of background about why I'm speaking to you. I'm a classroom teacher from Scotland, and I've taught that for a long time now. And I took part in a course called the Building Racial Literacy Programme, which you'll hear me refer to as the BRL programme. And I was a learner on that programme, and I loved it so much. It was so inspiring and changing. It was just a wonderful program of teacher education. It inspired me to begin a website called the PART Project, which again I'll talk about later. And then I began working on the program, so I became a facilitator and helping groups and leading discussions for cohorts 2 and 3, which just wrapped up last week. It's gone very fast. And I spoke on the intersectionality panel as part of this. At some point in this, I also began my master's in social justice and community action, and that is at the University of Edinburgh. And lots of the projects that I'm really excited about. Just started working with Historic Environment Scotland and other organisations looking at the learning that goes on in their sites, their links with schools, and how can an awareness of colonialism be incorporated into that learning. So that's sites like castles, like Stirling Castle, Edinburgh Castle, all sorts of historical sites, and yeah, who had a hand in building them, and where do the resources come from a lot of the time. And yeah, now I'm here, very honored to be at the Playful Schools Conference. So I can see a lot of comments coming in, which is so exciting right at the beginning, and I promise I will read through them all. There's just so much to fit in. But as part of this, I just thought I would just acknowledge my own bias. I'm very aware that this is going out to a worldwide audience. Things that I say might not apply to different contexts. So I am a BAME educator, a woman of colour, but I teach in a predominantly white school in Scotland. In a global context, it's fairly resourced. So yeah, there's children walking by, so apologies if you know that. So yeah, it's depending on where you are in the world. Some things you may think actually that applies, some things you might think, no, actually that doesn't so much. But so just a moment to acknowledge that. At the beginning here, could just take a moment to reflect. So looking at this mood meter, or just your own words, think about the question of how do you feel about discussing race with your learners? And again, this has changed from context to context. So reflect on your own feelings, experiences around race or identity in general, that intersectionality. Is that part of your teaching? Does that have a place in schools? You can note down 3 words that come to mind from this movie, or you could just, again, put it in your own words. And at the end, we'll share some in the chat and go through some different conversations and opinions. But just while I'm speaking through everything, just something to be mindful and think about, and I'll put this back on at the end as well. So some of the fears and barriers talking around talking about race in a classroom, you've got parental attitudes, and this can be a big spectrum from parents thinking, well, the priority should be literacy and maths, we shouldn't, doesn't need a place in school, to more extreme views maybe. Cultural attitudes in the ethos of the school, and colleagues and staff room and management, and wider community. Politics going on in different countries, fear of language and terminology, as things move rapidly. Think, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to accidentally insult people more. people's own experiences with race. They could have their own trauma, or have that fear that I speak about white fragility later, which is really something interesting to read about. Confidence, comfort zone, fear of being labeled. If you're an educator of color, particularly in a predominantly white area, you really have that fear when you discuss race that everyone's like, oh, here she goes again, or here he goes again, or here they go again, like just talking about race and banging that drum, playing the card. There's a myth of a post-racial society. There's no problem here. There's a black president. We've got an Asian prime minister. We've just got an Asian first minister in Scotland. But it is a myth. And lack of funding, time, support. You might be working in an area of need. Over this conference, there's been lots of conversations about assessment. And the demands of assessment can sometimes make the pressure really take away from things that are more human and holistic, and things like empathy and kindness when you've got these targets to be met. So I speak about bias a lot, and bias is that, like, those preconceived notions in your head, those things that are socialized into you. Like, for example, my elderly neighbor one day asking me, how long have I spoken English? And I know that my accent's confusing, but that's that bias, because that person had seen so many people move over to the UK. So when we moved in, they assumed must have just moved to the country, despite me having a very British accent. And these are a couple of examples of bias that I've shared with race training before. So the two pictures on the left-hand side refer to the experience of refugees. The refugee crisis is a big ongoing debate and is a really big contributor to contemporary racial attitudes in the UK. So you tend to find when the Ukraine war broke out that white Ukrainians, and there's surveys and polls and data that isn't just, the thing is like, oh, that's just their perception. No, there's a lot of data that shows that there was a more welcoming attitude, people more open to welcoming them, white Ukrainian refugees to stay or working to share resources with them, as they should be, does not take away from their experience. Whereas when it's refugees from Syria or Afghanistan, there's more of that distrust. That stop the silent invasion. It does not take away from experience of a Ukrainian refugee that's white. And even within Ukrainian refugees, you've got BAME Ukrainian refugees that have said they've seen a difference. There's newspaper articles about it. And that's the example of that bias. You've got standards of white beauty. So things are changing actually rapidly in the last few years, but that concept of pure white beauty, and that's so historic, I could talk about it forever. Plasters, skin tone plasters being white. I once saw black people coloring in a plaster on their fingers, and it broke my heart. And you're seeing kind of skin tones in different tones now, but it's quite rare. Sometimes they're even more expensive. The debate about Black Hermione, when this is a really random one, but when the stage play of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child started in London, the black one was cast as Hermione, and there was a fair bit of uproar about this. People said Hermione is not black; it's Emma Watson, but it's a book, and nowhere in the book does it talk about Hermione being any ethnicity. So that was interesting. And dolls, you very rarely see dolls of color, and when you do, they tend to be like the sassy best friend. So those are a couple of examples. And there's misconceptions when I talked about anti-racism and race and history of colonialism. And again, that comes back to my context. The UK has a steep history in colonialism. Lots of the time in conversations, it comes up that people feel like I shouldn't be responsible for things my ancestors did. Or when discussing anti-racist teaching, people going, it's just really easy to say the wrong thing. I'd rather just not. And that's race evasive teaching. And that's, it's shortchanging those pupils. Or when discussing the concept of white privilege, and if I had more time, I would unpack white privilege more because it's so interesting and something that really changed my perspective and learning about it. But I would recommend going away and reading about white privilege. But there's that thing of just because I'm white doesn't mean I'm privileged. Should be told I'm privileged. Do you know the experience of people in color does not take away from anyone else's adverse experiences? the whole point is listening and openness and really looking at intersectionality. How, you know, you could talk about an LGBTQ struggle and you can't compare, but then there's intersections. It's so hard to describe, it's such a big thing to unpack. And I remember when I was doing my undergrad and I was doing a gender studies class, and someone in the class said they didn't identify as a feminist because they thought there were bigger problems in the world like war. It was such a strange answer. And the tutor so brilliantly and so dryly was like, can we not multitask? So yeah, that's a difficult one. The Building Racial Literacy program, and I had more information on this initially, but half an hour is not enough time to cut it down, but I do share information more about it at the end. It's a real flagship. It's just been a wonderful, innovative, collaborative, community-based program, and it's a team of professionals, predominantly educators, but you have people who work in social work, police, museums, all sorts. And the aim is to build knowledge and understanding of racial literacy. Professionals can go back to their own communities and share lead training, examining the curriculum, sharing resources, and having that sense of community to just constantly share things that might help others, and improve working in education for people of colour, making more opportunities for them to be recruited. In Scotland, currently 1.8% of primary and secondary teachers are people of colour, but within primary, that's only 1.2%. And the GTCS got a target of 4% in the next so many years. But it's not just about building quotas. Quotas are important, but it's also about educating the people who are involved in the recruitment program, the recruitment process, on their own bias as well, because that kind of makes the change as well, in a more organic way than having quotas, but quotas are also important. So it's a play conference. When I was first asked to speak, I was a bit worried. How does my work relate to play? I worked in the early years, I've worked in the upper years, worked everywhere. So I thought, play in Andreessen, that's an interesting one. And the more I thought about it, the more I was seeing these links. You know, diversity should be normalized into classroom resources and visuals. Children are interacting with the space around them, and if there isn't the right representation, then they're coming up with different, and they're coming to their own conclusions, and then they might not be the most open-minded at once if they're not seeing that spectrum of identities. So they're becoming active agents, they're engaging conversations of social justice, even from the lowest level, and that can be teacher-initiated or environment-initiated, or like just to come out organically. Exploring real-world scenarios, exercising judgment. It's a safe space to reflect, to test out opinions, to work through the making sense of the world, and teacher confidence to practice anti-racism affects the way the pupils of colour can access learning. So how included do those pupils of colour feel? Do they feel represented in their curriculum? Do they feel like they're seen in the classroom? So it's good to have an educator that's got an awareness of some of the issues faced. Just a couple of practical examples. So from the lower years, you're looking at making sure that range of books. I'm at the International School of Billing, and I'm just blown away by how many books they have. It's just so beautiful, just incredible resourcing. And I'll talk about books again later and what we did in our library, but just making sure that they're seeing different, some that are specific to cultural holidays or celebrations, but then some that just normalize it. And there's loads of examples, and I share them on the website. Access to appropriate news stories, use of videos and RME. I put cultural holidays at the end, but I'm just going to mention it here because the next thing I'm going to say is avoiding stereotypes. Yeah, it'd be great to talk about things like, well, yeah, you should be talking about Eid right now. It's Ramadan, and how are these, are we celebrating these things? But that shouldn't be only what the children are seeing, because then that's when you have things like the neighbor asking me how I was speaking English. Like, that's when you have those things where you see someone and you assume they must be of a certain religion because that's the only reference point people have. So making sure that you've got those celebrations, but then you also have normalized diversity as well. It's just every day. It does not necessarily be part of a celebration or tradition. Dolls, again, if you've got dolls of different skin tones, but also different hair textures. Hair textures are really There's a lot of stuff around hair just now that's coming around, and the normalization of straight or like smooth curly hair is really interesting. So yeah, think about that as well as skin tone. Coloring pencils. I've had so many pictures children have drawn of me where, bless them, they've either had to use a black crayon or an orange crayon, and they've not had the right skin tone. So and that's that's not their fault. The resource wasn't there. So do they have access to skin tone colors? Displays, circle time, the conversations taking place. And then in the upper years, again, you think about that resourcing, the books, the videos, the cultural holidays, the normalizing, and then the art resources, but then also a really good reference, a really good stimulus is sport. My class of football matches now, and we've had great conversations about racism sport. When the World Cup came out, we had really good conversation about some of the issues around it being in Qatar, and it was so meaningful, and it was in a context that they really enjoy and they engage with. And they spoke the other day, actually. A couple of my boys were joking around. They were calling each other monkeys, but as in silly monkeys. And one of the people of color thought they were being racist. And well, we'll discuss this. So because I didn't think they were, just knowing them, I didn't think I would have been very surprised. So we said, oh, I think such and such is a little upset because I think that they are thinking of something that maybe has happened in football. And the boys immediately knew what I was referring to. And they were like, oh my goodness, we've been at football matches and we've seen it on like football news where black players have had like bananas thrown at them, shouted monkey at them, and horrible abuse. That's not what we're meaning. And there's two things going on here, because that people of color has the space to have that conversation and kind of alleviate his own fears. And then those boys are kind of realizing the way that their language is being perceived, and they can also engage with the conversation where they're saying, that's not how we meant it, we were just joking around. And it was to do with a book or some video or something, but it was not a racial reference, but it was really lovely. And they were like, no, maybe we wouldn't have said that. And it was a really open conversation that came from something really organic. I hadn't planned it, we were doing maths. But debating skills as well, research skills, honest history. You're teaching in Scotland. We've got the Glasgow slave trade and monuments and streets named after slave owners. Are you incorporating that into your history teaching? If you're doing World War II, are you looking at Allied forces? I was just recently doing some work creating resources for the Indian Army, and I read they were the third biggest Allied force, which is crazy because you just don't see that represented in teaching of World War II or any images of World War II. Looking at Black Lives Matter, again, you can't be too political in a classroom, but kind of from taking a step back, you can look at newspaper articles and again, use it as a resource. Looking at famous figures, you're doing Florence Nightingale. Have you looked at Mary Seacole? Making sure there's that balance. And again, sports figures. You don't just need to look at the race incidents, you can also look at their achievements. So that's really good. Sports is a big one, even just to getting boys into reading who are reluctant readers, that I've had lots of success with that. And graphic novels, which I've published here. It really should be a whole school approach. I've been really lucky to have really good support from my senior leadership team. They've really made it a school, like a school improvement initiative, and given me a lot of time and space to do this. We had a library book drive where we cleared out our library. I talked with my class. I had a primary 6 class at the time, so about 10 years old. And we spoke about, what do we want to see, what's outdated, and the only really references, we were looking for things like disability and LGBTQ and things like that as well, but from a race standpoint, the only representation in our library we realized was a copy of Peter Pan that had a tiger lily on the front, an art book that included a page on how to make your own homemade gollywog, which is horrific, from like the 60s, I think, and books about slavery, which is really important. You should have those, but that was all they were seeing. That was the only reference to slavery. So we cleared out, we gutted so many of our books, and some we donated, some we just decided it was best to be recycled. And we ran a book drive with parents and I shared a list, which is on the website, of books, and they donated books through an Amazon wish list, and it was just amazing. And also just applying just now to get some secondhand books as well from some different book charities. Created this map display, so children who had moved from another country or were had family in other countries, first generation, second generation, had the option of filling out a card, say my family from where I'm from, and I speak this many languages, and it was a very blanket statement. We did not, I had to be very clear, we're not going up to people of colour saying, fill out this card and put where you're from on the map. It was a very open invitation, and a lot of children, so that's a picture colleagues sent me of kids having a look at it when it was just put up, and now there's been more cards added and photos added. But it's generated so many nice conversations of, and really puts into context, oh, my friend moved from such, and that's here on the map. Also engaging in staff training, sharing information with parents, auditing that space. What have we got in the classroom? What have we not got? Updating policies to make sure that that language around anti-racism is embedded in policy. Looking at topic plans. In Scotland, we do interdisciplinary learning. So we have a topic and a lot of our learning goes through it. And where are the opportunities and framework for interdisciplinary learning for our for anti-racism and awareness of colonialism and history, and BAME inspirational people, where can that fit in? Assemblies and celebrations, we create a 3-year rolling celebration calendar for celebrations that we maybe would not be able to fit in every single year. So we kept the ones that are most relevant to our community every year. But then some children will just experience when they're in the early years, and then in the upper years, so they get 2 different learning experiences, but still have an awareness of that holiday. And the next step is anti-racism clubs. And I think that I might also look at this being like a social activism club or social justice rather club. Word activism can be a bit trickery sometimes, because there's also a lot of children that are really interested in LGBTQ rights and awareness and celebration. So it can be specific or it can be wider, just a qualities club, but that's the next step for our school. And facilitating conversations, it's probably the main bit of my presentation, and there's so much context to give, but a lot of the times there's a lot of fear about appearing too political as a teacher. It can be a bit dangerous sometimes. So sometimes it's better to let a resource do the talking. So my class right now, I'm reading The Boy at the Back of the Class, which is a book about a refugee that moves to the UK, and the narrator and his friends, or her friends, we don't know yet actually, want to befriend this boy. And they overhear the teachers talking about it, and Mrs. Grimsby is saying, they're going to come take our jobs, they wouldn't trust them, they're a bother, our kids are going to suffer, they're just coming to do what they like. And the other teacher is saying, well, he's from that awful war, I feel sorry, it's a death trap. And while I was reading, one of the pupils said, Mrs. Grimsby is being mean, can't help it if there's a war. And I said, well, why do you think she entered jobs though? Because that's a very specific, that turn of phrase of they're coming over to take our jobs is a trope that is very much it's very much prevalent in UK kind of media, and so you hear it a lot. That's kind of, and it's kind of weaponized in politics a lot of times. So I asked one simple question, and then they went off on this conversation, and some of it's waffle, it's all meaningful waffle. They kind of go off on tangents. One saying maybe the first people saying maybe she's worried she'll lose a job. There's too many people, but it's rude. And the crux of that, what that people said, is where they say he might not have wanted to move. So it's decided the child was displaced. They're not coming to steal a job. They didn't want to move. They've been cast out because of something awful that's happening. And people too chips in and says, oh, there wouldn't be enough jobs for everyone. If there were more children, though, there'd be more teachers. But and again, you can see them making these links, and then they go back to, but there's a war. He's not chosen to come in for a job. If he had, then it doesn't matter, but there's a war. So the crux of the conversation is an empathy and kindness and global citizenship. But it's not me saying we should, it's not me lobbying for anything political. It's just one question based on a resource. So I'm very mindful that resource, it can be easier if you're not confident talking about race in class, that it might be easier to do this through your resource. So on the website, and I'll share a link to it in a bit, I create this document. This is just 6 pages of it. It's like, I don't know, 20 to 30 pages, I can't remember. And it's a working document, so hopefully it'll grow over time. And it is just links to resources and ideas and activities and stories and lesson plans that help you embed anti-racism, sometimes directly talking about it as an issue, sometimes just something that's something that's a diverse, representative representation. It's diversity. But yes, but it's sorted by stages, and that what makes it more helpful as a teacher to just pull something over and put it on. You can use it, plan it. So next steps, I'd say read and explore. I'm going to share a link in the chat just now, which is a handout with some links. So have a wee look through that and have a look at the website and follow updates and things like that. Look at your own teaching space and materials and reflect and create personal goals, because these personal goals are so, things that are actionable. It's really easy to be like, school's going to become anti-racist. But that's such a big, long journey. I've been doing this for a few years now, and I never thought I'd be here, but these things build up, and you just have to make things reasonable, actionable, and just work through things that you can achievable. So next lesson, I'm going to take one resource and teach one lesson that's unpacking an issue. I'm going to look at the library. I'm going to have this discussion around this newspaper article. So small, or something personal. I'm going to read one blog by an educator of colour. I'm going to listen to this podcast. Things that are reasonable. So my website is called The Part Project, and it's the Primary Anti-Racist Teaching Project. It's grown and changed over the last year or so, and it's getting to a place where I'm hoping it's going to become a really stable resource for people. You can follow on Instagram and Twitter, please do, at The Part Project on both. One just says Chereen at The Part Project, but the actual handle on both is just at The Part Project. Please feel free to message. It's really lovely having feedback. It's really lovely having, so if the handout is hopefully going to be shared in the chat just now. Oh, I better move it down. It's probably already half. There we go. So please follow, and hopefully there'll be lots of updates, lots of ideas. The website will grow and grow and grow. If there's something specific you want, please get in touch. A teacher recently got in touch to say that she felt there's a real lack of outdoor learning resources that celebrated BAME and anti-racism. So once after Easter, get a lot of projects finished, and then that's my next task. So it's nice to be shaped by the voice of the community that's using it. So please have a look, and the link is in the thing, at The Part Project. So just to finish up, half an hour goes very quickly. Going back to that reflection, I know it's a lot of listening to me. Again, please share, how do you feel about discussing race with your learners? Has it changed over the workshop? It might not have. How could you action these feelings? And there were loads of comments at the beginning that were really lovely. Someone said that they liked acknowledging bias. Yeah, it speaks to people all over the world. Some people might have a class where there are no white pupils, and that means that changes completely the context of everything I'm saying. But then that might sometimes comes with different challenge. Everyone has their own context. Lots of people saying that every school should have this training. Yes, I really look at the Building Racial Literacy program. I hope that it becomes something that inspires other countries, other education boards. Any questions as well now, please? You've got a couple of minutes to put in. Yes, the Little Mermaid film. Yeah, I made this. I really should have thought about that. There's so many things about films and media, and yeah, great. Even like, I was having a conversation the other day about She-Hulk, the Marvel show. Loads of stuff. There are schools that are very diverse, kids that are already exposed to diversity, where the conversation easier, smoother. Do you have suggestions to have these conversations with class of kids that are less diverse and less exposed for the same reason? Again, making the less diverse and less exposed. Again, that representation. I listened to a talk by Rena Ashford, who's an amazing professor emeritus from Armenia. She talked about that drip, drip, drip effect. These things just small and manageable. It doesn't need to be, and that's sometimes a debate around Black History Month. It's a month, but this should be slowly through the whole year. It should just be normalized. I'll read you these questions and kind of process them more after. I might put some stuff on social media. Certain YouTube channels, websites. Yes, that's on that document. So please look at that big overview. If I just go back to it very quickly, if you go on this, it has just got all YouTube channels, some amazing ones with stories read aloud and songs for younger learners. So please have a look at that. And again, I'm hoping to update it, and I recommend, if you have recommendations, please give it. Engaging with parents. There are so many questions here, and I'm going to run out of time, but I'm going to read through them. And what I might just do is share a comment and a feedback, like answer any questions, some duplicates, put them together, and I'll share that on social media. So I'm going to leave that up just for the next minute. But thank you so much for listening, and so much to fit into half an hour, and good luck on your anti-racism journey. And please get in touch if you would like to. See you later.